Hey guys, welcome to the GT podcast. This is Andrew. I'm talking today about psychedelics. So, most of us see life in a certain way. We see it as being sort of fixed, permanent. It feels like nothing else has ever existed except us, in spite of the evidence otherwise. It feels like there are no other universes or life forms. Logically, there are billions of other planets, and there has to be more life. There's no way our universe was born into nothing. Therefore, it must be inside of another one, say through black holes as the medium. We don't feel these things, though, because our normal thought processes are very grounded. We sense things, then hypothesize about what they might mean. We see other stars and planets, but because they're so far away and we know we won't reach them in our lifetimes, we sort of just glaze over the potential for extraterrestrial life. We see suffering and harm going on to animals, to nature, and to everything around us, but we sort of glaze over that too. We adopt the heuristic, if it isn't tangible in front of me, it can't be real. We accept the fundamental nature of atoms and microscopic organisms because it's easy. If bacteria is real, it explains a lot of stuff, but our importance in the universe is not affected. But if we really are just a larger sort of bacteria with the Earth instead of an organism as our host, then things become more complicated. Suddenly, our lives become immensely unimportant given the scale of existence. Suddenly our contributions, the mistakes we wring our hands over, and the achievements we're so proud of become simply meaningless because they affect so little and so impermanently. But in our normal thought processes, we ignore this stuff because it's hard to truly understand these realities, and there's more pressing day-to-day activities like work, school, family, and survival to contend with. This is where psychedelics come in. Psychedelics are any compound or substance which produces hallucinations or expands consciousness. Psychedelics alter your thought processes significantly, such that things you never understood before, like the nature of existence, suddenly make sense. And in the wake of these substantial realizations, you find that you can't live your life as passively or meaninglessly as before. It's ironic that discovering one's total lack of meaning is what can give a life meaning. Because when you realize there's no cosmic deity watching and judging, it suddenly becomes your responsibility to live a good life for the sake of your own joy and freedom. When you discover your impact doesn't really matter either way, making an impact suddenly loses any relation to status. You realize in the future, even if you save humanity, no one will know or care. Suddenly the onus of making the world a better place is on you, and the only reason you can do it is because you want to. You gain control of your life because you realize everything is impermanent and insignificant, and the reward for leading a good life is simply the joy of leading a good life. The joy of helping your world become a better place. The freedom of knowing you do it because you want to, not because someone else will reward you later on if you do. That's what psychedelics can do for you. Or they can make you see crazy patterns and enjoy music and sex more. Depends what you want from them. The issue is that most people like the idea of introspection and enjoyable, somewhat crazy experiences, but they're afraid of the risk they believe psychedelics inherently have. I'd like to quell that misunderstanding right now. Think of the risk of psychedelic use in terms of going skiing or playing a sport. The risk of a minor injury or even a permanent life-altering injury is always there. It's an unavoidable risk of doing almost anything. Crazy, terrible stuff can happen without a moment's notice, but you likely play those sports anyways because the risk is so small, doing the activity is so fun, and by not being an idiot, you can mitigate the risk of injury or harm almost entirely. That's what it's like with psychedelics. If you prepare smart, understand the risks, and dose cautiously, the risks are minimal and the rewards can be positive and life-changing. Historically, psychedelics have been used mostly by two groups of people. First, by indigenous shamans, for physical healing or to amplify and intensify the processes of internal self-analysis and self-understanding, or as part of a tribe or village ritual to promote community bonding or celebratory worship. Second, by Western psychotherapists pursuing the study of psychedelic therapy. The early history of psychedelics involves naturally occurring substances like plants, mushrooms, or cacti. As far back as 10,000 years ago, science has proven the use of them by indigenous populations. They're mostly used by local healers to try and fix mental disorders and as part of complex spiritual rituals involving groups of people tripping together. It wasn't until the 20th century that scientists developed an interest in psychedelics and began studying them. It was around this point that Albert Hofmann first created LSD in an attempt to duplicate naturally occurring psychedelics. LSD became a go-to psychiatric treatment for a variety of conditions, including alcoholism, schizophrenia, as LSD effects are thought to mirror schizophrenias, and other personality disorders. Soon it became both a catalyst and a symbol for the use movement of the 60s. The federal government took notice and made it an illegal substance in 1967. As other party drugs like ecstasy, MDMA, have become popular, LSD has seen a resurgence in the scientific world and the ban on it has been lifted. but only for controlled amounts and only to proven scientific institutions. Psychedelics for millennia have helped people to grow closer to nature, mankind, and themselves, and as science and governments realize the potential benefits access to these compounds could have for society, they've begun to further study them to ensure their long-term safety. Psychedelics are powerful, potentially dangerous compounds. They can and should be used safely, and if the proper precautions are taken, the risk of long-term damage or negative experiences can be minimized, if not completely nullified. There are two aspects to using psychedelics which need to be discussed to use them safely and effectively. These aspects are the psychedelic itself and the environment the psychedelic is taken in. For the psychedelic, careful dosing is the first requirement. Psychedelics of any nature can be dangerous if quantities you can't handle are taken. The effects can be physical, where your body suffers in some way, which can lead to lasting damage, especially of the brain, which is very sensitive. Or the effects can be mental, where you suffer what's known as a bad trip. If you trip badly, you can emotionally suffer for hours, feel intense anguish, grief, or fear. You can see things which unnerve and scare you. The world's moving and things don't make sense, and as I'll go over later, your conscious perception of the world around you is very different under the influence of psychedelics. So things that normally don't faze you can seem terrifying while under their influence. The best approach, especially if you're first time using a new psychedelic, is to do what's called a sensitivity test. We start by taking a small amount and then gradually amp up to the dose you want when you feel the desired effects. It's smart because your body may be more sensitive to a compound than you realize, and if you start off too strong, you can accidentally cause yourself to have a really crappy experience. Secondly is the trustworthy source. You've got to make sure your source is safe. Testing kits can be used to assess the purity of different compounds, and it's a good idea to test whatever psychedelic you get, especially if it's your first time buying from whatever source you're getting it from. And finally, under psychedelics, it's drug interactions. Psychedelics work by affecting the various systems of your brain in a variety of ways. For people who already take drugs, nootropics, or pharmaceuticals that affect the brain, the potential for harmful interactions between these compounds is relatively high. It's not a heavily researched field, but the anecdotal evidence suggests it's a good idea to thoroughly research their chemical interactions before mixing psychedelics with other compounds. And if it's a prescription that you need to take for health reasons, be sure to do your research. Arrowwood is a good source for researching people's experiences, mixing different compounds together. Next is the environment. So the first thing to look out for with your environment is a comfortable setting. It doesn't have to be a big fluffy room to trip, just somewhere where you're comfortable. The idea is to be sitting where you feel safe and at ease, and where you can control any sort of external events, like the people around you. When tripping, especially if you're new, unfamiliar things can seem weird and scary, and since no one likes to be freaked out when they're high, it's better to avoid the risk entirely. So pick a house or a friend's place, lock the doors. You can even have someone not high to watch over you, a babysitter of sorts. But having someone sober around can dampen the experience, as they can't relate to what you're experiencing. But if you're new, it may be worthwhile until you get accustomed to psychedelics. You can trip outside too. Taking psilocybin mushrooms in the woods can be a ride, but you can't control environmental factors very well, and if wild animals or other people you don't know start popping up, it can really freak you out. Lastly, for environmental considerations, it may seem obvious, but if you're ill or unhealthy for whatever reason, take the time to recover before you begin experimenting with psychedelics. Ensure your physical health is standard, up to snuff. You're healthy. There will be a day to trip besides the one it is, and if you're not healthy, don't take the risk. If you act hastily, you can cause your body or mind lasting, irreversible damage. Further, if you have some sort of mental disorder like dissociative identity disorder, taking psychedelics can induce severe psychosis. Again, the evidence is mostly anecdotal, and if you're determined, I'm sure this advice won't stop you, but be careful. So here are some of the available psychedelics. They fit into 4 categories, the first of which is a category and a psychedelic. It's called LSD, or lysergic acid diethylamide. It's kind of widely known to be the archetypal psychedelic, as well for its role in the counterculture movement of the 60s. Its cognitive effects include altered thinking processes, closed and open eye visuals, synesthesia, and altered sense of time and spiritual experiences. LSD's addiction risk is minimal, but it can lead to anxiety, paranoia, or delusions. The experience of using LSD can be affected by the user's mood and surroundings. If the user is in a good mood or pleasant things are around them, the experience can be transcendent, awe-inducing, joyful, and very peaceful. If the user is in a bad mood or unpleasant things are around them, the experience can be very frightening and filled with upsetting hallucinations. The negative tripping experience is usually called a bad trip. LSD is a white, odorless, and a tasteless powder. It can be mixed with liquids or taken orally as a powder, but usually it's absorbed by highly absorbent blotting paper, known as a blotter, and taken by letting the paper dissolve naturally in the mouth over about a half an hour. A tab of acid, or one small piece of blotting paper, part of a strip of 5 tabs, contains about 100 UG or micrograms of LSD. A microgram is a millionth of a gram, so active doses are very, very small, and even minute amounts of LSD can be extremely potent. Acid is usually taken in 2 ways, either at a trip dose, where the intention is to sort of lay around or do simple activities and enjoy the way acid makes you perceive the world, conversations, food, music, any sort of sensual stimulation. It's rare that anything really productive is done on acid, and time seems to pass by incredibly quickly, but if you can stay focused, the altered state of consciousness allows you to analyze your life from a completely different perspective. It's easy to have some truly startling insights into aspects of your life you've never really thought about. It's fairly common for experienced users to mix LSD with other compounds, ecstasy being a popular choice. The combination is known as a candy flip. The results can be fun and surprising, but since LSD makes you very sensitive to sensual stimuli, if you're partying or socializing, it's easy for a good night to turn really weird fast. The other way of taking acid is to microdose it. People who are in creative fields or very social jobs find that if you take a very small dose of acid, usually between 10 to 12 micrograms or about a tenth of a blotter, they can be much more productive that day. It helps their thoughts to flow more fluidly and artistic output to increase as a result, and to feel more at ease socially. As with a trip dose, anything negative will affect the user more strongly. So if you're likely to get yelled at by your boss, it may not be a good idea to boost your sensitivity to stimuli by taking even a little bit of acid. Next is psilocybin mushrooms, or magic mushrooms they're usually called, which are any sort of mushroom that contains the active compound psilocybin. They affect your body in ways very similar to LSD. Objectively, the chemical processes are very similar between the two, but subjectively, people usually report feeling much less social and much more introspective on mushrooms. LSD is sort of a logical, analytical high, whereas mushroom is more of a holistic, system-level, introspective high. Sort of like thinking about your life in detail versus your life as it relates to the overarching universe, so your place. The parts versus the whole. As well, LSD hallucinations are usually geometric patterns and weird color combinations, whereas mushrooms give you a more visceral but slower building set of hallucinations. There are different strains of mushrooms which carry the compound psilocybin, but the most commonly used one is cubensis. For a cubensis strain, the average person would need about 1.5 to 2 grams of dried mushroom for a mildly strong trip, which is enough for a first-time user, as the novelty of the trip will count for more than the extra dosage. As you become more experienced, you can always amp up the amounts. The third type is called DMT, or N-dimethyltryptamine. It's a psychedelic compound which is found naturally in plants, but can also be synthesized as a powder in labs. It's also a naturally occurring compound in the human body, which is thought to be the cause of our dreams. But to be used as a psychedelic, excess amounts beyond what the body produces must be introduced into the system. As a psychedelic, its effects are very similar to LSD and mushrooms, but it does have some odd differences. First, it's significantly more powerful, not in the dosage sense, but in the effect depth sense. If you took way too much acid, you feel the same basic effects at a more moderate dose, but just amplified beyond what's enjoyable. With DMT, any sort of active dose is incredibly powerful, even if you take the bare minimum. There's also been historically constant reports of little elf-like creatures called machine elves invading the trip and doing weird things. What's weird is that they show up in all different sorts of cultures and from different methods of DMT. They're sort of a constant of the compound. In all cases, they're these weird little anthropomorphic ball things that sort of resemble elves or smurfs or any other sort of tiny, almost human life form. DMT can be taken in a few distinct ways. As an extract, you can smoke DMT or consume it orally. If you consume it orally with an MAOI, or monoamine oxidase inhibitor, it lasts for about 3 hours and has effects similar to mushrooms at a dose of about 100 milligrams of pure DMT extract. If you smoke a bowl of it, the smoke becomes incredibly concentrated and hits almost immediately. The body becomes temporarily paralyzed as though you're stuck in a deep sleep, and vivid mind-consuming hallucinations occur for about 5 minutes. The dose is about a small bowl, but it's unlikely you'd be able to overdose using a typical bong setup. There's also an Amazonian Amerindian ritual that involves brewing a tea out of the ayahuasca plant and tripping for nearly a full day. It's become sort of a cultural, quasi-spiritual trend to have found yourself through an ayahuasca tea ritual performed by a backyard shaman. But that only testifies to the power of the trip's influence in those who experience them. In media, Jennifer Aniston went on an ayahuasca trip in the movie Wanderlust, but it didn't look like the producers had really taken a psychedelic before. It's thought that the alkaloids in the ayahuasca plant interact with DMT to give a modified version of the pure DMT experience. As well, the plant matter induces vomit in nearly 100% of users, and a lot of people poop themselves too. The plant matter doesn't agree with people's systems, so the body sort of ejects it in whatever way it can, which is usually vomiting and often is other ways as well. It's a messier psychedelic than most, but the sacrifice is necessary to trip, and it also means that only those who are truly determined to prosper from the trip will take it because of the sacrifice. And overwhelming anecdotal evidence suggests that the people who perform ayahuasca tea ceremonies do benefit from it. And the final category is mescaline, which is a compound found in peyote, San Pedro, and Peruvian torch cactuses. Like DMT, psilocybin, and LSD, users report altered thinking processes, closed and open eye visuals, synesthesia, and altered sense of time and spiritual experiences when on it. Mescaline is very rarely extracted, as it's most potent when eaten as part of the cactus. However, it can be extracted and pure powder can be used. Either way, it's ingested orally, usually as part of a ritual. Historically, the Navajo Indians used it in as spiritual rituals, but in the West, it's another tool used for self-discovery. Peyote is the most commonly consumed of the cactuses, as the 50 or so phenethylamine alkaloids within the cactus give it a unique psychedelic effect. That is, it gives the world a sort of 3D geometry look, sort of like a cubist painting, as well as the normal psychedelic effects. During a peyote ritual, a group sits inside a tent staring into a large fire. Participants chew up to 30 buttons. Cactus buttons are the orb-like part that grows above the ground, and trip collectively for 12 to 24 hours. They enter into a trance-like state accompanied by chanting and a pulsing drum beat. The low light and repetitive, evocative music help potentiate the spiritual experience, and people often report enlightening events and spiritual realizations occurring because of the ritual. Depending on the type, dosing, and user, different experiences can be had on psychedelics. These are some of the commonly reported experiences people have, and keep an open mind here. So the first category is the ordinary, which includes aesthetics. It's very common for people under the influence of any variety of psychedelic to experience visual phenomena. Things like changes in spatial perception, colors seeming richer and deeper, and even the color schemes of the world around changing. The walls can seem like they're pulsing or even breathing along with the user. Objects can appear and disappear, and even objects that have no place where they are can seem to be around you. It's peculiar. If music is played, synesthesia usually develops where the world, the colors, the walls, everything really sort of moves along to the music. Next is psychodynamic phenomena. People under psychedelics often vividly relive memories and past experiences. While this can occasionally lead people to relive negative or unpleasant experiences, it's generally beneficial to the user as they get the opportunity to come to terms with their past and to move on from the event and forgive those involved. And psychotic phenomena. Don't allow that label to scare you. Psychotic phenomena are simply cognitive events that hinder your ability to operate in everyday society. Things like social anxiety, bizarre behavior, or loss of touch with reality. Unlike people who are clinically psychotic, however, these phenomena are almost always minor in their effects and are sort of to be expected when the walls are melting and everything follows different sort of logic from what most people expect and are used to. It's going to be tough to carry on a conversation when the world is going crazy around you. So it's sort of a base expectation when you're on a psychedelic to have minor psychotic phenomena appear, but really it's nothing to worry about. It's sort of just a result of you being distracted by what's going on, and they don't last. The next category of experiences people undergo is the mystical. So this is sort of the more spiritual aspect of it, and so people experience feelings of unity between the practitioner and their truer inner self, or between the practitioner and the external world, characterized as a sort of feeling of connectedness to everything around them. They experience the feeling of truly understanding reality. In the psychedelic state, usually under LSD, insights into the true nature of reality are quite common. Transcending space and time. One feels as though they are viewing the past, present, and future simultaneously, that they have escaped the bounds of time and exist in a timeless state floating through eternity. A sense of sacredness. One feels as though they are in touch with the philosophical, spiritual, and religious concepts often described. It's as though they feel the true value of their lives for the first time and how important all life is in the grand scheme of things. It's no surprise people often become very hesitant of taking life needlessly after extensive use of psychedelics. Deeply felt joy, love, and optimism. With the above described feelings of connectedness and of importance, people generally feel very optimistic and positive, as they feel truly valued and confident in their place in the universe. Further, as they realize how truly wondrous all of life is, they can't help but love their neighbors. Paradoxicality. Aristotelian logic tells us the universe operates in a certain manner. However, people on psychedelics often describe the universe as operating beyond logic. There's a loose physics theory sort of explained, a link that we're all waves of energy moving at such a speed as to resemble matter. People on acid often report witnessing this sort of reality firsthand, which runs contrary to the logic we're all used to, which is that things are as they appear to be. Ineffability. People feel as though their experiences can't adequately be described by the available words and symbols we commonly use. That their experiences made sense while they were happening, and everything seemed to have its own logic at the time. But once people come down and stop feeling the effects, the logic of what they witnessed often disappears, along with the means of describing it. Transiency. Life usually feels pretty permanent. The rules of the universe seem consistent, even if we don't fully understand them. But on psychedelics, it feels as though everything can change in a moment. The colors, the insights, the warping, changing world all contribute to this feeling that gravity could suddenly disappear, or that we could suddenly wake up and realize our whole existence up until this point has been some bizarre dream of a different life form. It feels as though everything is temporary or possibly even an illusion. Changes in behavior. Overwhelmingly, after psychedelic use, people have lasting positive changes in attitudes towards themselves, others, and life in general. While some people do have traumatic experiences and end up psychologically damaged, if psychedelics are treated with respect and caution, then lasting positive improvements can reliably be made to one's perception of reality and their place in it. Psychedelics can have a myriad of positive effects on the lives of their users. They can reliably produce eye-opening, incredible experiences, and they can also be a lot of fun as well. Generally, psychedelics can help in these ways. They can lessen mood disorders. They do this by allowing one to analyze their thought patterns from an altered state of consciousness, which is almost an outside perspective relative to one's normal mode of thinking. Further, they reduce one's sensitivity to negative information, allowing those with chronic negative thought cycles to escape their repetitive negative thinking habits and reform more positive ones. They can teach users about themselves. Beyond allowing one to analyze their thought patterns, they allow one to externally analyze their entire lifestyle, their past, their planned future. Everything about their lives is up for grabs. There's numerous stories of people effecting positive changes to their lives because of psychedelics. They can bestow universal optimism and positivity. In the chemical afterglow of psychedelic use, for at least a day, people seem to glow with warmth and enthusiasm for life. Eventually, the chemical aspect of the positivity starts to fade, however. The lifestyle changes and resolutions people made because of their introspection do not. In one study, 80% of participants quit smoking after years of the habit because of controlled psilocybin mushroom use. In another, there's early evidence people could have significant improvements to their lives because of LSD. How to get them? There are a few ways to get psychedelics, one of which I recommend more highly than the others. Your options are to try and find a local dealer, which can be challenging, risky, expensive, and usually very hard. Most local dealers don't carry much beyond cannabis and maybe a little cocaine. Find legal substitutes. Instead of LSD, take salvia, for instance. Except salvia is a poor substitute for LSD. It has a much higher risk of an unpleasant trip and harm to the body, and it's an unnecessary compromise. You can go abroad. Travel to Peru for peyote rituals, or Yucatan, Mexico, to experiment with ayahuasca. If you want the full-fledged ritual experience, traveling abroad or finding a local shaman, which is easy in LA for whatever reason, is a must. However, it can be very expensive to travel that far, especially as insurance is a must. And if you lead a career-driven or generally just busy life, going away for a few weeks to the desert or jungle to experiment with organic psychedelic rituals can be challenging. No duh. Which leads to the final option. Order your psychedelic of choice online. Basically using a Tor internet browser which anonymizes your IP address and essentially makes you untraceable on the internet, you gain access to millions of additional websites. If the web address for these sites were put into your normal browser, now they would lead nowhere. They only work in a Tor browser. Once you have the Tor browser up and running, you can access a bunch of new sites, some of which are online marketplaces. These marketplaces operate similar to Amazon in that customers leave ratings and reviews of vendors so potential customers can assess the legitimacy of the vendor and the product. If you're skeptical, you're right to be, but if you want Reddit, you'll find thousands of user reports of people successfully buying legitimate merchandise through these marketplaces. But the one hiccup is that they only sell merchandise for bitcoins. Bitcoins are a cryptocurrency, that is, they're packages of data people mine digitally using their computer's processing power. A certain amount of this data is equal to 1 bitcoin, and that has an associated monetary value. As of this video is being posted, 1 Bitcoin is equal to 428 US dollars ish. If you use a Bitcoin exchange, you can exchange your paper currency and your online bank account for this cryptocurrency at the current exchange rate plus exchange fees, usually a percent or two. Once you have your Bitcoins, you can buy products from trusted vendors on one of the hidden online marketplaces and have it delivered to your front door. The risk to you are non-existent, as your identity online is anonymous. The currency cannot be traced back to you realistically, and legally, unless they can prove you've ordered it. You can't be charged for illegal merchandise being shipped to your place of residence. As for customs vendors, cleverly disguise the psychedelics in a variety of different ways, which makes them untraceable, and as they appear to be legitimate packages, they're shipped through into your abode. Further, even if they are seized, which is unlikely as it can't be proven that you ordered them, they're simply destroyed by customs, and if you explain what happened to the vendor, they'll usually send you another package free of charge because they want to maintain high ratings so people trust them and will order from them. Basically, install a Tor browser, acquire some Bitcoins from an exchange, find a hidden marketplace's web address, access the marketplace using your Tor browser, buy your psychedelic from a trustworthy vendor, wait for it to show up. Once they arrive, use it. Psychedelics are simply another tool in the arsenal of the individual who wants to lead a conscious, self-improvement driven life towards the ultimate goal of enjoying the process of making the world a better place. It's an ambitious and I think ubiquitous goal, but it is incredibly attainable. If you stay focused on what's important to you, you'll naturally tend towards making the decisions which bring you closer to that reality. But if you focus on fitness a lot and not superficial aesthetic comparisons, you'll ultimately find yourself going to the gym and getting fit. It's simple. Focus on what matters to you. What psychedelics help you do is open the box. They help you find what's inside of you and what you truly value. That you unpack the components of your life and your beliefs about the universe and analyze or understand them better, which ultimately leads to you leading a more conscious life where you're aware of your values and you actively pursue them. If you think dropping a hit of acid will help you get over your spouse, though, or any other sort of negative experience, which is why you're using them as sort of crutch or to escape something negative, and if you think it'll help because if you're trying to get over something negative and you're trying to use a psychedelic to get over that negative experience, it's probably not going to help. If your life is in a bad place, trying to escape it by going into a different sort of state of consciousness won't do anything. All it'll do is force you to analyze the components of whatever it is that's bothering you. But that can be a very negative experience because for up to half a day, you're being confronted by the realities of whatever it is that's bothering you. And that can be very, very unpleasant. And I wouldn't necessarily recommend it as the best way to go about fixing that issue. However, if you are in a good state of mind, and you can approach psychedelics cautiously and from a learning perspective, it's very possible you'll find nothing bad happen to you because the chemical risks of psychedelics are virtually non-existent. What you might find is the freedom and ability to analyze and overhaul your life in a holistic and completely internal way. And you can also have some fun too. So if you do take them, it's possible you'll find your life is changed immeasurably for the better. As long as you're cautious. So be safe. And if you do trip, I hope you enjoy it. This has been from a fellow featherless biped, Andrew.